The FBI just sent subpoenas to the NBA and WNBA. Federal agents are demanding phone records, team schedules, and internal documents from multiple franchises. This is not a rumor you saw on Twitter. This is not speculation from a sports blogger. The Department of Justice is involved, congressional committees are asking questions, and commissioners are being called to testify. Professional basketball just got a reality check that nobody saw coming. Before we break down everything happening right now, I need to ask you something. Drop a comment and tell me honestly, do you think gambling corruption in professional sports happens more often than we hear about? Or are we just now seeing the tip of the iceberg? Because based on what's coming out, this situation runs deeper than anyone expected. Let me start with what we know for certain. The FBI has formally opened an investigation into both the NBA and the WNBA regarding illegal gambling activities and the sharing of inside information. According to reports from The Athletic and ESPN, federal investigators have requested records and property from numerous teams across both leagues. The Los Angeles Lakers are the most prominent name that's been made public so far, but sources indicate this touches multiple organizations. 2 Lakers staff members have already turned over their mobile phones to federal investigators. Mike Mancius, who works closely with the team's training staff, and Randy Mims, an executive administrator, voluntarily surrendered their devices. When federal agents start collecting phones from team employees, they're looking at text messages, phone calls, emails, encrypted messaging apps, everything. These phones are now being analyzed by forensic specialists who can recover deleted messages and trace communication patterns going back years. The core of this investigation centers on sports gambling and whether players, coaches, or team personnel shared confidential information with gamblers to help them win bets. We're not talking about someone placing a friendly wager with their buddies. We're talking about organized schemes where inside information that could shift betting lines and guarantee wins, was allegedly being sold or traded. That crosses a line from a league violation into federal criminal territory. The charges that sparked this massive investigation involve some pretty significant names. Terry Rozier, currently a guard with the Miami Heat, has been formally charged by federal prosecutors. Chauncey Billups, the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, has also been implicated in the case. These aren't fringe players or assistant coaches nobody's heard of. Rozier is a starting guard making millions per year. Billups is a former NBA Finals MVP who transitioned into coaching. When people at that level get federal charges, you know this investigation has substance. Adam Silver, the NBA Commissioner, recently sat down for an interview where he addressed the situation directly. He admitted that the league became aware of unusual betting patterns back in March 2023. Legal betting companies noticed what they called aberrational behavior around a specific game and reported it to the NBA. The league launched an internal investigation at that time. Rozier cooperated, turned over his phone, sat for interviews, and the NBA concluded there wasn't sufficient evidence to take disciplinary action. Rozier kept playing. But here's the critical difference between an NBA investigation and a federal investigation. The NBA can ask you questions. You can refuse to answer. You can lawyer up and walk away. The league can fine you or suspend you, but that's about it. The federal government operates on an entirely different level. They have subpoena power. They can compel testimony. They can threaten criminal charges if you don't cooperate. They seek grand juries that review evidence with a level of scrutiny no sports league can match. So when the FBI picks up where the NBA left off, they have tools and leverage that Adam Silver could never access. Silver acknowledged this in his interview. He said the league has been cooperating with federal authorities for over 2 years since that initial incident in March 2023. He pointed out that Rozier still hasn't been convicted of anything, which is fair. An indictment is not a conviction, but the optics are terrible. A player the NBA cleared is now facing federal charges for the exact behavior the league investigated and dismissed. Congressional committees have started asking uncomfortable questions about why the NBA didn't report certain evidence to law enforcement earlier. If the league knew something suspicious was happening, if they had information suggesting criminal activity, and they chose to handle it internally rather than involving authorities, that creates a huge problem. At minimum, it's a public relations disaster. At worst, it could be construed as obstruction or covering up criminal behavior. The Lakers keep coming up in these reports, and the connection runs through LeBron James, though not in the way you might think. Nobody is accusing LeBron of anything illegal. But one of the people charged in this investigation is Damon Jones, a former NBA player who has a long personal friendship with LeBron and has worked with him in various coaching capacities over the years. Federal investigators want to understand the network of relationships. If someone in that network was sharing inside information, they need to know who knew what and when they knew it. That's why the FBI requested documents from at least 10 different Lakers employees. They're mapping out communication patterns, relationships, and information flow within the organization. When you're friends with someone under federal investigation, authorities are going to look at your interactions with that person. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong, but it means you're going to get questioned. Some people online have been speculating that this investigation is why LeBron has missed games recently or seems less engaged than usual. Maybe he's dealing with legal consultations behind the scenes. Maybe his attorneys advise him to keep a low profile while this plays out. Or maybe he's just managing the normal wear and tear of being nearly 40 years old and playing professional basketball. The speculation writes itself when federal gambling investigations start circling your team and people you know personally are getting charged. Now let's talk about the WNBA, because this absolutely impacts them too. The WNBA operates under the NBA's organizational structure. They share administrative systems, financial frameworks, and oversight. If the FBI is investigating gambling, corruption, and insider information sharing in the NBA, the logical next step is examining the WNBA for similar patterns. Federal investigators typically work through these situations methodically. They focus on the larger league first, gather evidence, identify patterns, and then expand their investigation to connected organizations. The WNBA has had its own controversies this season that make federal scrutiny particularly concerning. There have been questions about officiating, suspicious calls that change game outcomes, and accusations of favoritism towards certain teams or players. Nothing has been proven, but fans have been vocal about games not feeling entirely legitimate. If federal investigators start looking into whether referees or team personnel were sharing information with gamblers, or worse, if games were being influenced to affect betting outcomes, the WNBA could face an existential crisis. The league is smaller than the NBA, which creates a double-edged sword. On one hand, there are fewer people involved, which should make corruption harder to organize. On the other hand, smaller organizations can be easier to manipulate because there are fewer checks and balances. A single referee making questionable calls in a WNBA game could dramatically shift betting lines. A coach or trainer sharing injury information that hasn't been made public could give gamblers a significant advantage. The type of inside information that matters to gamblers is pretty specific. Injury reports that haven't been released yet, which players are dealing with personal issues that might affect their performance, game plans and strategic adjustments, whether a coach plans to rest starters. All of this information is incredibly valuable in the sports betting market. If people inside organizations were sharing it for money or other benefits, that's wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and potentially other federal crimes. Referees represent another concerning angle in this investigation. If officials were involved in sharing information or manipulating games to benefit specific betting outcomes, that destroys the integrity of the entire sport. We've seen it happen before. Tim Donaghy is the most infamous example. He was an NBA referee who bet on games he officiated and made calls designed to influence point spreads and total scores. He went to federal prison for it. His scandal rocked the NBA in 2007 and damaged the league's credibility for years. If something similar is happening now across multiple teams and potentially two leagues, the fallout will be catastrophic. The NBA appears to be trying to get ahead of the situation by proactively contacting teams through their legal departments and requesting internal documents before the FBI formally demands them. That's a smart defensive strategy. Show cooperation, demonstrate transparency, try to control the narrative and minimize damage. But it also signals that league officials know the situation is extremely serious. You don't mobilize legal teams and start demanding documents from 10 different employees on a single team unless something major is happening. The timing of certain personnel moves is also raising eyebrows. The Dallas Wings recently fired their head coach and general manager in moves that seemed abrupt at the time. Other teams have made sudden personnel changes that didn't have clear explanations. Were those decisions connected to this investigation? Were organizations cutting ties with people they suspected might be involved in illegal activities? We don't have answers yet, but the timing creates reasonable questions. This story broke within the last few days, and it's already dominating sports media. The New York Post ESPN, major networks, and social media platforms are all covering it extensively. This is not going to be a quiet scandal that fades from the headlines in a week. Federal investigations move slowly and thoroughly. Every phone record gets analyzed. Every email gets read. Every text message gets scrutinized. Everyone connected to anyone under suspicion gets interviewed. This process will take months, possibly years, to fully resolve. For the WNBA specifically, this comes at the worst possible time. The league is in the middle of contentious CBA negotiations that have stalled. Players are uncertain whether there will even be a 2026 season. The league had incredible momentum this past year with record attendance and viewership numbers, but financial stability remains concern. Now, at a federal gambling investigation, on top of everything else, it's a nightmare scenario for a league that was finally gaining positive traction. Commissioner Cathy Engelbert is going to face very difficult questions in the coming weeks. If the FBI determines that gambling corruption existed in the WNBA, even on a small scale, the damage to the league's credibility would be severe. Fans need to believe that games are legitimate, that outcomes aren't predetermined or manipulated, that competition is real. Once that trust breaks, rebuilding it takes years of consistent transparency and accountability. The congressional scrutiny adds another layer of complexity. When elected officials start holding hearings about sports leagues failing to report criminal activity, this moves beyond just a legal issue. It becomes political. It becomes about accountability, transparency, and whether organizations with billions in revenue and massive cultural influence should face more oversight. The NBA generates enormous amounts of money and has significant power in American culture. Congress wants to know why a league that powerful wasn't doing more to prevent or report illegal gambling operations within its own organizations. Some people are defending the leagues, arguing they can't possibly monitor every employee's personal communications or prevent every bad actor from making poor choices. That's true to some extent. Organizations can't control everything their employees do in their private lives. But when federal prosecutors are charging current players and coaches, when congressional committees are demanding answers, when the FBI is subpoenaing records from multiple teams across two leagues, it suggests a systemic problem rather than isolated incidents. The phrase comprehensive federal investigation keeps appearing in reports, and that should concern everyone involved with professional basketball. Comprehensive means they're looking at everything, every team, every department, every person who might have had access to valuable information. It means this isn't targeted at one individual or one organization. It means investigators believe the problem is widespread enough to justify a massive allocation of federal resources. For players and coaches who had absolutely no involvement in any illegal gambling activity, this situation is incredibly frustrating. Their reputations are being questioned by association. Every decision they made on the court is now being second-guessed by fans wondering if games were fixed. The cloud of suspicion hangs over everyone until the investigation concludes and findings are made public. Even completely innocent people will deal with whispers and accusations until their names are definitively cleared. WNBA players specifically are probably watching this unfold with deep concern. They're already fighting for better pay, improved working conditions, and more respect for their league. Now they have to worry about whether a federal gambling investigation will further damage the WNBA's reputation and financial stability. It's not fair to them, but that's the reality of being part of an organization under federal scrutiny. Their careers and livelihoods could be impacted by actions they had nothing to do with. Social media reactions have been intense and all over the place. Some people are making jokes and memes. Others are spinning conspiracy theories about which players knew what and who's going to get charged next. Some fans are genuinely worried about the future of professional basketball and whether they can trust what they're watching. Comment sections are filled with speculation about LeBron, about whether specific games were fixed, about which other teams will be implicated as the investigation expands. One thing worth remembering in all of this chaos is that being connected to an investigation doesn't mean you're guilty of anything. Federal authorities asking questions about you doesn't mean you did something wrong. They cast wide nets in these investigations because they need to understand the full scope of what happened. Innocent people get caught up in federal investigations all the time simply because they knew someone or worked somewhere that became part of a case. But the reality is that federal investigations don't care about public perception or whether fans like certain players. They care about evidence and prosecuting crimes. If people broke laws, they're going to be charged regardless of how talented they are or how many championships they've won. professional athletes don't get special treatment in the federal justice system. If anything, high-profile defendants sometimes face harsher scrutiny because prosecutors want to make examples out of public figures. The next few weeks and months are going to be critical for professional basketball. The NBA and WNBA commissioners will need to make additional public statements as more information becomes available. More names will likely be leaked as documents get subpoenaed and phone records get analyzed. Teams will continue cooperating with authorities because they have no choice. Refusal to cooperate with federal investigation creates its own set of legal problems. And fans will continue speculating and debating about what this all means for the sports they love. This investigation could reshape how professional sports leagues handle gambling issues, how they monitor internal information sharing, and how they cooperate with law enforcement. It could lead to new policies, new oversight mechanisms, and potentially new federal regulations around sports betting and information security. The sports gambling industry has exploded in recent years, with legalization spreading across the country. That growth has created enormous opportunities for corruption if proper safeguards aren't in place. So that's where we stand right now with the FBI investigation into professional basketball and illegal gambling. Federal authorities are deadly serious about this. Multiple teams are implicated. Both the NBA and WNBA are facing major scrutiny that won't end anytime soon. If you want to stay updated as this story develops, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop your predictions in the comments about where this investigation goes next and which other names might come out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.